Hey, Mrs. Castle.
Hi.
McGraw still hasn't gotten back to me about.
Have you contacted them?
Yeah, they said they would email me, and they never did.
And when did you send them the email?
Last Friday.
We can call them after class.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I know that I received several emails last night from lots of students about different things. And I will tell you, it was not a good night for me. I ended up being up much later than I planned and had a lot going on. And so if I did not get back to you, talk to me about it today after class and we'll figure it out. And other questions and concerns? All right. So today, I want to finish the blood. And I want to start into the lymphatics. And we will, in lab, we will cover the lymphatics and the immune system. Why am I right here? Bear with me here. This isn't what I meant to go to. And I don't want you to see it, so I'm going to close it out. Yeah. So let's start about right here. I honestly, normally I write down every time we end class where we were at. And I did not do it. So I kind of guesstimated last night approximately where we were. Does this look about right? Do you think? Maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. So what this is that the kidneys secrete erythropoietin, and they do it in response to low oxygen levels in the blood. What that means is that hypoxemia is the trigger for whether or not you secrete erythropoietin in the blood, which is hypoxia meaning low oxygen levels. And so when there is less oxygen in the blood that's going to the kidneys sense this as low oxygen levels, and they secrete erythropoietin. And erythropoietin is the hormone that's going to stimulate erythropoiesis. What is erythropoiesis? Do you remember from last week? What's erythropoiesis? So poiesis is similar to genesis on the end of a word in a lot of ways. I'm not sure. Go ahead. Tell me. I'm sorry, Becky. Go ahead.
Okay, the production of red blood cells.
That's exactly what it is. So erythropoiesis is the production of red blood cells. Rather than calling it erythrogenesis, which would be another way of saying that, it's called erythropoiesis. What the difference is when they call something poiesis versus genesis, I don't know. I wish I knew, but I've honestly never thought about it until just now. And the result is that you get additional circulating erythrocytes, and therefore you can bring up the oxygen carrying capacity in the blood. And then that increased oxygen carrying capacity relieves that stimulus that relieves the hypoxemia that initially triggered the secretion of erythropoietin. Any questions about this? So hematopoiesis, like Becky just said, is red blood cell production. It occurs in the red bone marrow of the axial skeleton in adults, in the axial skeleton and girdles. So in your pelvic girdle and as all of a sudden I can't think, your pectoral girdle. And in the epiphyses of the humerus and the femur. Remember, the epiphyses are the ends of the bones. So erythropoiesis is the maturation / production of erythrocytes. Once they're produced, they have to mature. This is a process. It starts with the hematopoietic stem cell. What does it mean to be a stem cell? If we have a stem cell, what does that mean?
It's in its early stages or new.
It's new. And what specifically, what does it mean about what it can become? What does it say when it's about what it can become?
Mature.
Say it one more time.
Mature. T cells or no?
Kind of. It can grow up. It's new. It can grow up. A stem cell means that it isn't completely differentiated, and the stem cells have different levels of differentiation. Not to go off on a tangent, and because I tell you I went to bed at about 3:30 in the morning last night. What that means is that I am more at risk to go off on tangents today than probably it's been a long time since I've been at this high of risk to go off on tangents. But I mentioned the reason we like stem cells is I have a friend that I went to you gotta love Facebook because it keeps you in contact with everybody you ever knew ever. And I went to school with somebody who had, what was it? Lymphoma that spread to his brain within the last, I don't know, year and a half. And he just underwent stem cell therapy to treat to work to eliminate a lot of the tumor cells. And it's actually working. The tumor is actually shrinking.
Oh, that's good.
It's really quite neat because I didn't, essentially when lymphoma spreads to the brain, so when you've got a lymphatic tumor, think of your lymph nodes, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. When that is spreading to your brain, it's pretty much a death sentence. Well, he and his wife have a little girl who, looking at the pictures of her, can't remember exactly when she was born, but it was probably about a year and a half ago. And so this is kind of, right now he's kind of on that cusp of where he's still dealing with the tumor, but he just had this stem cell therapy neural stem cell therapy to see if they can't work through some of the complications that have been produced by the tumor. So stem cells are really neat little things in that they're not completely differentiated. And a hematopoietic stem cell is a stem cell that's moved a little bit along the process of differentiation. And at this point is capable of becoming anything that has to do with a red blood cell. It isn't differentiated enough that it's going in a specific track. And we'll talk more about what those specific pathways are here in a moment. But it's where it hasn't completely differentiated one way or another. But it's in the pathway of where it's becoming some sort of red blood cell.
So basically, like in layman's term, it's like an unassigned cell.
It's an unassigned cell. It's partially assigned. It's going in the direction of the red blood cells.
Okay, but
Go ahead, Becky.
If you were to like remove that, like you said, and he went under research, then it kind of adapts to its environment.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it will receive signals that will continue to send it in a pathway towards specific types of differentiation.
Okay.
To become certain types of cells.
Okay.
But it's still in a position where it can become a white or a red blood cell. It can move in several different directions.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That was a good way to put it. So a hematopoietic stem cell becomes a hemocytoblast. So now it's moving in a specific pathway, becoming a hemocytoblast. Remember, if you had me for last semester, what does blast mean?
Build.
It means it's a building cell. Yes, Kevin, it's a building cell. So a hemocytoblast, meaning it's a building cell. This also means that it's a preliminary cell. It can give rise to all of the other formed elements of the blood. During the maturation of the erythrocyte, the hemocytoblast that will become pro-urethroblast. You think pro always means preliminary. So these are what are going to become erythrocytes, aka red blood cells. And then they develop into early erythroblasts. So hemocytoblasts, pro-urethroblast, now they're committed to a particular pathway of becoming a red blood cell. So it forms early urethral, and this CFU means colon forming units. Bear with me. We're going to see this again, so I'm going to type it out. CFU means colony forming units. And think of colonies as cell colonies. So now we've got these early urethroblast. And there's 3 phases of this. The first phase is that we're going to synthesize a lot of ribosomes. What's the function of ribosomes? I know that was a really long time ago. That was like chapter 3.
Is it protein synthesis?
It is, it's protein synthesis. So ribosomes are synthesized in the early urethroblast. You get lots of ribosomes being produced. In the next phase, we get hemoglobin. Remember that, and just think of it as erythrocytes are just big bags of hemoglobin. Remember that 97% of their content is hemoglobin. So in phase 2, the hemoglobin starts to just accumulate. And in this point, the cells are called normoblasts. And once the hemoglobin, we get so much hemoglobin, remember that we're going to ultimately have 97%. The nuclei gets ejected from the cells. Remember that our red blood cells are the only cell that is, I think, it's either one of a few or the only cell that's anuclear. It does not contain a nuclei. So the mature red blood cells are anuclear. So once the nuclei is ejected, they become what's called reticulocytes. And reticulocytes then become mature erythrocytes.
Why is it called a reticulocyte?
Say it one more time, Martin.
Why is it called a reticulocyte?
That's a really good question. And let me think if I can come up with an answer. It's a really good question because I'm not sure I have a really good answer either. Part of the reason they're called that, and we'll see it in a moment here, is that they are formed from the reticular tissue. Do you remember when we talked about the tissue types in 121, we talked about the tissue types. What type of tissue was the lymphatic system? What type of tissue did we call that when it was in the lymphatic system, in the spleen, in lymph nodes?
Lymph tissue, but
You're close. You're close. What else could we have called it? You're right, but you're close. What else could we have called it? Martin, do you remember what we called it?
Is it lymphoid tissue?
You're
Yeah.
so close. You're so close. What type of tissue was there? What type of connective tissue was found in the lymphatics?
Reticular?
Yes, that's right. So Lauren, reticular tissue was found there. Reticular connective tissue. And so Martin, the reason they're called reticulocytes and where that name reticulo comes from, let me figure it out between now and lab, because I am not completely sure. But they're called
Thank you.
reticulocytes because they're in the reticular connective tissue.
Got you.
And I think, and I may be wrong, but I think reticulo means filtering. Because when we talk about the lymph system, the specific, and think reticulocytes, these are still red blood cells. Where do all red blood cells come from? They all originate in the bone marrow, which is reticular connective tissue. And reticulo may mean filtering, because what we're going to see is that the lymph system, specifically the bone marrow and the lymph nodes, and some of the thymus is really a major filtering area. So that was a very long and complicated answer to why they're probably called reticulocytes. Does that help?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay. So we need certain things to produce our erythrocytes. We need proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. Another thing that's a definite need is folic acid or vitamin B9. It's one of the crucial vitamins for prenatal vitamins. It's also, I was born with a cleft lip and palate, and this is linked to cleft lips and palates. But it is a crucial thing with regards to erythrocyte production. So it's necessary for DNA replication to produce the purine ring. Remember how in the DNA bases, we have purines and pyrimidines? It's necessary to produce that purine ring, purine base. Without it, red blood cells can't complete their maturation, can't complete these stages. Vitamin B12, necessary also for DNA replication, similar function to that of folic acid. And iron, which, remember, that's a major component of hemoglobin. It's oxygen binding site. And it's stored in the spleen, liver, and bone marrow. So we talked about the fact that we have this hemopoietic stem cells. I can't remember a word from a second ago. They are type of pluripotent stem cell. I'm going to say one more thing about stem cells really quick. Bear with me. So the way it works is stem cells start with totipotent stem cells. And totipotent stem cells are the stem cells that are a developing zygote, meaning a very early embryo, where that one cell divides into the second, those cells divide into four, those cells divide into and so forth until we get this clump of cells that then starts to become different layers. Those early cells are totipotent stem cells, meaning they can become anything. They haven't gone a specific pathway. They haven't started down any specific pathway of differentiation. Once they continue going down, they become pluripotent stem cells, meaning they are starting to take on a particular pathway or a certain category of cells. So one way to look at these hematopoietic stem cells is they're pluripotent stem cells. They're starting down a certain pathway. They can still become a lot of different types of cells, but they're moving down a specific pathway. So pluripotent stem cells become myeloid stem cells and lymphoid stem cells, meaning they're just continuing this level of differentiation or specialization. And they can either become a lymphoid stem cell at this point, or excuse me, this hematopoietic stem cell that's a pluripotent stem cell can either become a lymphoid stem cell or a myeloid stem cell. One reason we really care about this is if you've heard of leukemia, there's two different types of leukemia. There's I think it's myelogenic lymphoma and lymphoid leukemia. Myelogenous and lymphogenous, something like that. I'm sorry, I did have a really late night last night. But those two types of leukemia, and it's leukemia of these cells going of this category, cancer of this type of category of cells, or this type of category of cells. That's part of the reason they can differentiate into the two different types of leukemia, or two major categories of leukemia, is which types of leukemia is it? Is it coming from these types of cells or these types of cells? So coming back, these hemopoietic stem cells become either lymphoid stem cells or myeloid stem cells. And then they continue to specialize. All erythrocytes, platelets, eosinophils, basophils, neutrophils. Remember, these are your granulocytes. They are all coming from the myeloid stem cell. Remember, the CFU means colony forming units. If they're coming, what the lymphoid stem cell line is going to become the T or the B lymphocytes or the natural killer cells. And we'll spend a lot of time talking about these different types of cells in the next chapter. So myeloid stem cells can become erythrocytes, platelets, eosinophils, basophils, neutrophils, or monocytes. And remember, monocytes are the ones that are agranular. So this is an agranulocyte that's coming from a myeloid stem cell. It's the only one that doesn't have any granules in it of the leukocytes that's coming from the myeloid stem cell line. The lymphoid stem cell line is producing the T lymphocytes, the B lymphocytes, and the natural killer cells. I don't want you to remember all this right in here. Some of it you're going to learn anyway, just because we talk a lot about it. But I want you to know what stem cell, whether it's a myeloid or lymphoid stem cell, results in whether the cell originated from the lymphoid stem cell or the myeloid stem cell. A few more types of cells that are important, though, especially when we talk about the lymph system. The mast cell, the macrophages that develop from monocytes, and plasma cells. Any questions so far?
That's a
We will
great
see-
chart.
Go ahead, say it again.
That's a great chart for
And we will
studying
be
purposes.
we will be seeing it again.
Can you repeat the
Let's
last
see.
statement?
Go ahead.
Can you repeat the last statement?
We'll be seeing it again.
No, before, I'm sorry, before she said something.
My head's spinning.
You said something about
What?
monocytes and I got lost there.
Oh, the macrophages are forming from the monocytes.
Okay.
I think that was it. Mother, don't do that. My mother's like, my head is spinning. I'm like, Mother, remember that I went to bed at 3:30 in the morning. If you think your head is spinning, mine is spinning too.
Yes, but I'm listening to you.
Well, that's even worse. When her head is spinning because she's listening to me, then we're in trouble. Okay. So
I'm curious, was her A&P back in the day the same as our A&P?
Mom, did you hear that? Was your A&P the same as their A&P?
No.
No, that was a clear and
Only
definite.
some of it.
Is this harder or easier? Curious.
From what I'm listening to Mary, and there's a lot of things that were not covered. But it was, the focus was a little different. I had to learn massive amounts of vocabulary.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
and
that's a
we had to
separate
define-
class now.
Yeah, we
define-
don't.
Say again?
I was gonna say that's a separate, I've taken at least 2 semesters of medical terminology,
Uh-huh.
but yeah,
Well, that would help you tremendously.
it does. Totally.
I took medical terminology after I took A&P.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Would you suggest that's what we do? If we could?
That's what I'm gonna end up doing.
Yeah,
Which is
and
the
I
reverse of what
didn't
we
find
did.
a deficit.
It's actually a really helpful class,
Yeah.
Oh, really?
believe it or not.
I would think it would be helpful too.
It's like learning the language of the body and anatomy and anything that you need to learn. It's actually a fantastic class. I took it years and years ago, but so thankful that I took it before this class.
Yes,
I-
I'm sure it helps you link things better.
You can help us too. Thank you.
Sure,
Honestly,
sure.
I would like, that would be a class that I would like to take too.
It's
Yeah,
on,
actually,
Go
Thank
ahead, say it again. It's actually what?
it's on my list to take, but I don't know why they didn't push to take that before you got into your A&P.
You know what? You know what? I'll bet you money, Becky. And no, because I've never had a medical terminology class. Once you go in there, it's just going to compound and solidify what you know right now.
That's the hope.
Fingers crossed.
So
Yeah.
anemia covers a lot of different things and can result from a lot of different reasons. But what it means is that it's a below normal oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. And it's characterized by a low hematocrit. There's several different types of anemia. There's a nutritional anemia, pernicious anemia, aplastic anemia, renal anemia, hemorrhagic anemia, and hemolytic anemia. You might be able to guess on the bottom ones where they're from. Hemolytic anemia, what does that probably result from?
The destruction of red blood cells.
Yeah, it's a destruction of red blood cells. So we're having an over destruction of red blood cells. Sickle cell anemia would be in this area. Hemorrhagic anemia, what does that mean?
Bleeding.
Yeah, it means an extensive amount of bleeding that's causing you to have a low oxygen carrying capacity. So sickle cell anemia is an inherited disease where when the red blood cells bind oxygen, the normal red blood cell then takes on a sickle-like shape because of one base substitution in the genetic makeup of the hemoglobin. A lot of base substitutions don't change the protein structure. This is a really good example of where it does. And they sickle because of the hemoglobin, which is produced instead of the normal hemoglobin. And because of the change in the structure of the hemoglobin, it forces the red blood cells to take on this sickle-like shape rather than the disc-like shape. Remember how we talked a lot in the first chapter of AMP, how important structure is to function. If you think about it, these little smooth donut-like discs are going to move a lot easier through the blood than a sickle. That sickle-like shape makes them easily more likely to clump up with one another and to get caught. And so it's just a physical fact that they get stuck. And so they often clump together, forming clots.
Does it say inherited because it's something you get from, like your roots, or?
Yep, it's a genetic disorder.
So it is. Okay.
And the major, I don't want to go into this, but the major, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But the major reason is, why does it stick around? Something that is off many times in the evolution of people, when there's an inherited disorder that's going to ultimately, most likely, stop you from passing on your genetic material to the next generation. Why does it stick around? And they do know, there is an answer. The heterozygous state, where you have one chromosome comes from your mom, one chromosome comes from your dad. When you have one that has the hemoglobin, the mutated hemoglobin sickle cell, and you have the normal one, in that heterozygous state, you have a malaria resistance. This sickle cell abnormality actually confers a malaria resistance. And malaria is something we don't have a cure for yet. That's the reason it sticks around. Is because when you have just one of these on one of your chromosomes rather than two, you have a malaria resistance. When you have two of them, that's when you have sickle cell anemia. When you just have one, you don't show the trait of sickle cell anemia, but you do have malaria resistance. So anemia, different types of categories. Iron deficiency anemia, probably the most common type of anemia. I think one of the students in this class mentioned that she actually had post-operative anemia. I'm not gonna mention her name. She can mention her name if she wants to, but she.
Oh, that was me.
That
I had
was
it.
you. I knew it was.
Yeah.
I remember who had it.
Oh my God, it was so incredibly awful. It is awful. And I didn't even really have, I mean, my blood work came, I had not a horrible case. And I think of, oh my God, like people in third world countries who have it, and the fix is so inexpensive and easy. It's very sad.
What did they do to treat it?
So I took Fe, or the Fe is like on the chemistry chart, ferrous sulfate.
Yeah, you took a big iron supplement.
An iron supplement, which cost me like $2.50 at the pharmacy. And I think in the beginning, I was taking like 2 a day. Now I'm taking 1 a day, but like I couldn't even stand up without being dizzy and my hands and feet were cold. Like there wasn't enough oxygen getting to the parts of my body that needed to get oxygen.
What was your hematocrit? Claire, did you ever know?
I did get the blood work. I'd have to look at it. I don't know, but it, I had an operation. I bled out a lot from the operation, and I also had a blood transfusion. So I don't know if that gives you any idea how.
My mom says even with the transfusion, you had the anemia, and she's like, wow.
Yes.
Your brother came out of post-hemorrhagic operative anemia with a hematocrit of 27, and he could hardly sit up in bed.
Yeah,
I couldn't even
wow.
I don't know. I pushed myself. I was like, I don't know. I couldn't even shower without feeling like I was going to faint. Like wow. I would get up, go to the bathroom, lay down. What?
No, I'm wanting you to finish. My mom is saying some stuff too, but because I'm hearing impaired and I can only really focus on one person sometimes.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way.
So
I'm totally the same
saying
way.
what you're saying.
Oh, and oddly, like for an entire week, I didn't even know that I was anemic So I was like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Like, I just didn't know. And my mom was like, come on, let's go out. And I'm like, no, I'm gonna spend the rest of my life in my bed. Like I was like, I can't even stand up without feeling horrible. I'm dramatic too, you know. I'm like, I'm not leaving my bed
It's okay to
forever.
be dramatic when you don't feel well.
Right.
And that's
But
caused by the sudden loss of oxygen carrying capacity when you're used to having it at a normal level and all of a sudden it goes wham down at the bottom.
And
Then
that
your body
drastic.
hasn't, your uncle that died of AIDS walked around with hematocrit at 17.
I'm surprised
But
he was
yeah, that
even
was
walking.
gradual.
Ah,
Yeah, sometimes your body can adjust, you know, somehow it makes it so that you function a little better.
Claire, it made you so sick because it was so, it didn't gradually occur. It would just happen.
right. And
That's
even with
why,
the blood,
that's what she
even with
was
the blood
explaining.
transfusion, it took me probably like a good week, and then a bunch of. Actually, after I took the iron, after 3 days, it was like a miracle. I was like, oh my God, this stuff is. I don't know if it was like a combination of blood transfusion and other stuff, but like the iron was like a magical pill, like, and so
Wow.
cheap. And then and then I think, oh my God, people in third world countries suffer from that. It's so sad. Like, and it's such an easy fix.
I was furious with the doctors who refused to transfuse Eric.
All right, so she was saying when Claire was talking a little bit, she was saying that my brother came out with post-traumatic hemorrhagic anemia.
He had hemorrhagic. It
Post-operative.
It was a suicide attempt, and he came out.
Oh,
with
this was that.
Yes, post-operative hemorrhagic anemia, and the doctors refused to transfuse him, and he could not even sit up in bed.
And he had a 27% hematocrit. Remember what the normal level is? Especially, what's
45?
the normal level for men?
45?
Yeah, it's about 45%. Wow.
Women I have better sit in my head than men.
So, that's how, as Claire talks about it, and my mom was talking about it. So I think my mother also mentioned we had an uncle who died of AIDS, and we'll talk about why AIDS is so nasty when we talk about the immune system. But he died of AIDS, and because it was such a gradual change, he walked around with a 17% hematocrit towards.
That seems inhumane to me. That's terrible. Well, and back, I don't know how long ago it was, but like AIDS was misunderstood for a very long time.
It was, and it's a mean and nasty disorder. We will talk about it here. Yeah, and
I was 91.
Yeah, my cousin got AIDS from a blood transfusion after a hysterectomy, and and in the 90s, like she couldn't even get dentists to work on her. Like nobody even wanted to touch her. Are you okay?
No, you're just causing me physical pain. That's harsh.
Mm-hmm. That's so. It's
You're causing me emotional pain that's making me like to want to cringe.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No,
yeah.
it's all right. No, because I'll remember. I'm empathetic, and wow.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Yeah. And I mean, and for 10 years, doctors told her it was in her head that she was mentally ill, like, and she had AIDS, like she had HIV.
So they didn't realize she had HIV. They just decided she was mentally ill.
Correct. They told her like it was in her head for like the longest time. Her teeth were falling out. No dentist. She finally got like into a dentist at NIH, but like nobody would work on her. Like nobody would touch her. Like, yeah, it was. She went through a lot of hell because of having HIV, and she got it through a blood transfusion. I mean, no matter how you get it, it's awful, right? But very innocently contracted it. And interestingly enough, her husband never got it.
But you
Wild.
what they first off, let me when we talk about reproduction, women are several times more likely to get a sexually transmitted disease than men are. And it's based on the fact that your female reproductive tract is much more open.
Mhm.
And the chances, one thing that I learned about AIDS transmission later after, I mean, I was only marking my age. I was in high school when the AIDS pandemic was a big deal.
Me too. We're probably the same age, but
Probably. And I remember that it was very frightening. And when I learned later that, and I think it may have been from my mom, I'm not sure exactly where I learned it. But even from a prick, a needle prick from an infected needle, your chances of getting AIDS from that are still very, 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 very low.
that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Isn't that what you told me?
Yeah, 4% of identifiable in the workplace contaminations will seroconvert.
Did you guys hear that?
Not clear.
Say it one more
Yes.
time, Mom. I'm sorry. She's in her pajamas still. We were not morning people today.
I am, but I was up late. Excuses, right? 4% of people who are contaminated by needle stick in the workplace will seroconvert to positive for AIDS. So it's hard to catch HIV in the workplace. It has to be transmitted under ideal conditions. I had a friend who stuck a person with an IV needle. Couldn't have been worse if she tried. The needle came out of the guy, known HIV positive patient. Somehow got flipped in the air, hit her in the back of the hand. She bled and bled and bled.
Oh, God,
And she
that's
said to the
horrible.
doctor, well, wouldn't that have helped? And he says, no. He says, you couldn't have done it worse. That was blood to blood transmission. So, and she never seroconverted.
Seroconverted means she never developed AIDS.
Yes, she never turned positive.
My
Yeah, my
sister
father got it.
actually,
Yeah.
she
Well, yeah.
they tried
Say it
to find
again,
it.
Casey.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know, my father passed last semester from COVID. But he had HIV.
I'm sorry. That's so sad. Hugs to you.
Thank you. I believe he tested positive probably in like 2010.
Wow.
Yeah. I knew he had it. The doctors were running every test. And I said, he's showing signs of possibly having HIV. And they're like, are you sure you want us to run a test? I said, please. And lo and behold, that's what he had.
Well, you know, at
Were
least
they,
you want to know what
able
you're
to treat
dealing
him
with.
and keep that under control until the
Yes.
COVID event?
Well, when he first was diagnosed with HIV, the first cocktail that they gave him, thankfully it worked. He didn't have to go through a series of drugs, but it also caused, other issues with his kidneys, his prostate. He even developed some part of dementia at one point.
Wow.
It was a lot. Yeah.
That was a lot.
So he didn't have a fighting chance really when he got COVID last year.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
How old was he?
73.
He's really young.
That's young. I mean, on the young side of elderly, but it's young.
It's
Hey.
still young.
I want you to, don't use, well, you can say.
Don't
elderly.
use elderly.
You tell him.
No,
You
no.
tell him.
No, I'm 74. So.
You tell him.
You're young. You're young.
I was like, you
Yeah,
are
and I'm
still
going
young.
50.
Don't even.
Hey, my mom just turned 70 and she can run circles around me. So
My
All
mom
right,
Great.
you guys, let's get back on topic because we're gonna get behind. We're gonna get really behind, and that would be bad. So, when we talk about the immune system, and yes, bring up the HIV/AIDS stories again, because we are going to talk about it now, especially now that we've got, I know people have in the class have experiences with it. So iron deficiency anemia, other nutritional anemias, an anemia, renal anemia, that was on this other one, this back here, renal anemia, and a erythropoietin deficiency. If you quit secreting erythropoietin, you will not produce the red blood cells. You can take it as a supplement. Erythropoietin is one of the most highly abused hormones right now. Pernicious anemia, meaning a B12 deficiency. Hypoplastic or aplastic anemia, destruction of the myeloid tissue. Remember that the myeloid stem cell up here, this one. So a destruction of the myeloid tissue by radiation, viruses, some drugs, poisons, arsenic, or an autoimmune disorder. Anemia of old age, declining erythropoiesis due to nutritional deficiencies, reduced activity, and so forth. Hereditary clotting deficiencies, hereditary anemia, hemophilia. Non-hereditary causes like hemorrhagic anemia, an aneurysm, or possibly menstruation trauma. I know that I developed anemia in my teens, most likely through menstruation issues. And I just, like Claire talked about and a little bit, I probably don't take the same iron supplement she takes, but I take one every day, mainly to prevent anemia. Drug reactions, penicillin allergies.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Is that why they have the iron pills and the birth control?
Probably.
Some of them have sugar and some have iron.
Why do birth control pills have iron? She says, I don't know.
I've never heard of that. That's interesting.
I would guess that it's probably for the same reason, but it could be that your iron would be important for development of your baby's red blood cells. And if he's leaching it all out of your body, you probably need to be taking extra iron.
But it's birth control, so you're preventing that, which is like
oh wait, is that what she said? Did she say birth control?
Yeah, birth control.
Shoot, you guys, I am so not awake.
I'm only 18. I can't have a baby.
Don't have a baby yet. No, don't have a baby yet.
It's totally fine. We have all been there. I'm kind of there myself this morning.
There's plenty of time to have babies.
Iron, I would guess yes, because from what I'm sorry, not prenatal. Birth control pills. If I understand right, they make your periods more regular, right? So you consistently have one a lot of people will go on birth control sometimes just to get a normal 28-day cycle. For that, and so was that Lauren who asked this? Maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, for that same reason, because with your normal 28-day cycle, you are at risk for iron anemia. A lot of times females, we can make up for it. We don't need to take an iron supplement. But that would be a major reason to put it into birth control pill. Thank you. Parasitic infection, red blood cell destruction in malaria parasites. Sickle cell anemia, thalassemia is, oh, and I should know this because I just thought about it the other day. Thalassemia is deficiency of the heme group in hemoglobin. Is that right, Mom? I was going to be really impressive. Tell me yes.
I should know that, but it's not.
I'm almost sure that's what it is. Thalassemia is, and I'll look it up. If it's not in the PowerPoint later, it's deficiency of the heme group. Another one, hemolytic disease of the newborn. We will talk about it later in this chapter. We need to get going so we can get to it. But we will talk about hemolytic disease of the newborn and transfusion reactions are other reasons for anemia. Polycythemia, characterized by too many circulating red blood cells and an elevated hematocrit, or a hematocrit that's above or beyond 70%. I think someone was telling us in this class that they regularly have a high hematocrit. It may have been my other class, but I thought someone said that they regularly have a high hematocrit. And the problem with it is that your blood viscosity is really high. You're more likely to clot. It puts more pressure on your heart. It makes your heart work harder because the viscosity of the blood is increased. Remember that the viscosity of the blood has almost everything to do with the number of red blood cells. The osmolarity is everything else. So Sarah, here's a case study for you. Sarah, a healthy 26-year-old woman, has a physical for her new job at Amazon. The doctor calls a few days later to report that he'd like to redo her blood tests. She gets busy at work and does not find the time to go back for another month. The doctor calls her 2 days later with her results. Initially, her red blood cell count was on the higher end of the normal range. Was initially on the higher end of the normal range, but now it is even more elevated and is now above the normal range. He asked her if she has experienced any life changes since her first blood draw. So initially it was on the high end and elevated. And now it is now it's significantly above the normal range. Sarah admits to smoking due to a stressful nature of her job. Smoking increases the amount of carbon monoxide in the blood. Carbon monoxide binds to the hemoglobin, and I may have mentioned this before. The reason carbon monoxide poisoning is so nasty is it binds to the iron 200 times stronger than oxygen does. So once it's found, it's next to impossible to displace. So smoking increases the amount of carbon monoxide in the blood. You can get carbon monoxide poisoning in other ways. My mother's brother, her older brother, developed carbon monoxide poisoning as an auto technician. I was trying to think of the right word and it was really still too early in the morning. Auto mechanic. It was an auto mechanic, as my mother corrects me in the background. Explain how this new habit of hers might result in a higher than normal red blood cell count. You guys, why would she have a higher red blood cell count? Say it a little louder.
Sorry, I was just reading.
Okay,
I was reading the last.
why would
Is
she?
it because of the lack of oxygen? Is it because of the lack of oxygen?
Why? Well, yeah, but why? What's sensing the lack of oxygen? Let's start there. What is sensing the lack of oxygen? Do you remember from a second ago?
Carbon monoxide.
Well, the carbon monoxide's not sensing it. What's I know, Mom.
Oh, what senses it specifically? Okay.
You're right.
Let's see.
Hemoglobin.
What?
You guys, what causes what secretes erythropoietin? What organ?
Kidneys?
Yes, exactly. The kidneys. So the kidneys secrete erythropoietin. If there's too much, if remember that carbon monoxide binds 200 times stronger to the iron. So if carbon monoxide is bound, that means that oxygen is not binding. So the oxygen carrying capacity is now significantly lower. So if the oxygen carrying capacity is significantly lower, how are the kidneys responding? What are they
Do
doing?
they make more red blood cells and hemoglobin to encounter that?
Okay, say it one more time, Zena.
Do they like make more red blood cells to encounter
They don't
that
make the
in
red blood cell. They don't. You're right and you're wrong. What they don't make the red blood cells, but what do they secrete in response to low oxygen levels?
Hemoglobin
Say it again.
or hematocrit? Is it hemoglobin or hematocrit? One of the two. Hemoglobin, right?
You're really close. Erythropoietin. Is that what you were going to say, Kevin?
No, actually.
Okay. So they secrete erythropoietin. So a patient now, and so what the result is that has secreted because of in response to the fact that she's got a low oxygen level being bound to her hemoglobin because of the carbon monoxide in her blood. Her body is creating more red blood cells to try to compensate and elevate the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Patient comes into the clinic with a low red blood cell count and a higher number of reticulocytes. This was the question that Martin asked about reticulocytes, and I couldn't give you a really great answer. A higher number of reticulocytes, and after some testing, he is discovered to have a bleeding peptic ulcer. How do these results relate to a bleeding ulcer? What does it mean to have a high level of reticulocytes?
Does it mean that your body's just continuing to, like, it's trying to make new red blood cells?
It is. It's
So
trying.
because you're losing them. That's like a constant, like it's trying to keep up.
It's trying to keep up, and what with the reticulocytes, what that means, and I'm going to back up here. Bear with me. I'm sorry. I'm scrolling back.
They're immature blood cells.
Say it again, Kevin.
They're immature blood cells. immature.
Yeah, exactly. They're immature red blood cells.
Right.
So they're just not quite there yet. But we have to put out something. So we're putting out those. You know, your body has to put out something. So low red blood cell count. So this is essentially your body is compensating for hemorrhagic anemia. Hemorrhagic meaning you're bleeding somewhere. And your body is trying to compensate for that. So moving on a little bit more here. Hemostasis. What does hemo mean, guys? What does hemo mean?
Blood?
Hemo means blood. That's right. What does stasis mean?
Same.
Means same or to stop.
Yeah.
Or keep it the same. So hemostasis is the natural process in which the blood flow slows and a clot forms to prevent blood loss during an injury. So it's a natural process to slow down the rate of blood flow and allow for clot formation. And there's 3 basic steps. There's a vascular spasm, platelet plug formation, and coagulation. A vascular spasm, if you think about a spasm, meaning a vascular spasm is a prompt constriction of the blood vessel. So stimulation of pain receptors results in a transient constriction of the vessels. Your body's way of trying to prevent too much blood loss. Injury to the smooth muscle of the vessel and release of serotonin. What's serotonin, guys? Do you remember that from last semester? What's serotonin?
It's a chemical in the brain.
It's a chemical in the brain, but what does it do? Can you classify it a little better?
Like specifically like a mood booster, but like in blood.
Well, no, don't think about it as specifically in the blood. If it's the same everywhere, what is it? What is it in the nervous system?
It's like a calming?
It is, let's look at it this way. Go ahead, Kevin.
Mood, and it affects your mood.
It affects mood. What the word I'm looking for is it's a neurotransmitter.
Exactly.
That's what we were going for.
You guys, you know everything about what that neurotransmitter does. I'm impressed. Okay, so it releases serotonin, and this serotonin, we think of it, you know, as it's a mood stabilizer. It's your mood drug, your mood neurotransmitter. It also works as a vasoconstrictor, and it's released from platelets that results in long-term vasoconstriction. Remember, we haven't talked about it yet. Well, you know, platelets are involved in clotting. So it's released from the platelets that results in long-term constriction. We get the transient vascular spasm, and then we get the long-term vasoconstriction. from serotonin being released. Then we get a formation of a temporary plug. When the platelets are exposed to the collagen fibers, not collage, that's a typo there, collagen fibers. Remember, collagen is one of those connective tissue skeleton fibers, cytoskeleton fibers. So when exposed to the collagen fibers within the broken blood vessels, platelets become spiny and sticky. They start to form spines and they start to become very sticky. And the result is that these activated platelets stick to torn walls, vessel walls, and other platelets, and they form a platelet plug. As the platelets also, as they're getting spiny and sticky, couldn't think of another way to say, easily say they form a lot of spines. So we're calling them spiny and sticky. As the platelets aggregate, they degranulate, producing even more serotonin. Remember what serotonin is? That's their vasoconstrictor. And ADP, you guys remember what ADP is? Adenosine diphosphate.
Energy.
Yeah, well, it's what's going to make energy, essentially. It's what will be making energy. But right now, ADP is actually involved in promoting more vasoconstriction and platelet aggregation. This is another function of ADP. We thought it was just involved in energy creation. No, it's got other functions. So platelets are they're degranulating, they're producing more serotonin, and they're producing ADP and another neurotransmitter hormone called thromboxane A. As the platelets are degranulating and producing more serotonin, ADP, and thromboxane A, I don't think I'm saying that right. I think it's thromboxane. I think it's thromboxane. So thromboxane, this process is further promoting vasoconstriction and platelet aggregation. The platelets they're aggregating, they degranulate, they release more serotonin, ADP, and thromboxane A. This stimulates more vasoconstriction and more platelet aggregation. So rather than being a lot of what we talk about are negative feedback loops, remember negative feedback loops and positive feedback loops. This is an example of a positive feedback loop. This is a big deal in a moment here because we don't always like clotting. That's what we're getting here. So this platelets, they aggregate, they degranulate, they release serotonin, ADP, and thromboxane A. They're producing this vasoconstriction and platelet aggregation. And then we get activation of a coagulation cascade, where we form a fibrin plug or the final clot. This is one of the most complicated processes of the body that involves over 30 chemical reactions. Say, Professor Gessel, thank you for not making us memorize all 30 reactions.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, because we're not going to. The ultimate goal is to convert fibrinogen to fibrin. And the red blood cells and the platelets are going to stick to the sticky fibrin. A lot of sticky things. The platelets get sticky and then the fibrinogen gets cleaved into fibrin and it becomes sticky. And so red blood cells and platelets are sticking to the fibrin, and that's what makes up the fibrin plug or the final clot. Now that was a lot of information. Bear with me, we're going to watch a quick video here. Honestly, I'm glad you guys are such a good class because I was really worried about this morning. I thought I really would just like Hack to be counseled because my night was so late last night, and I don't normally try to do that very often. And this class is going a lot better than I expected it to. So thank you. It's partly because you guys talk as much as you do, and I appreciate it. So let's see here.
It's an early class. It's painful for all of us.
What?
I said it's an early class. It's painful for all of us.
But you know, Claire, you being here makes it better. Do you understand that?
Yes, we all wake up with the same thoughts. Want to go back to sleep.
Yes. You, in addition to a lot of people in this class, you talk a lot. Like I have classes where nobody talks. And can I tell you how that it's not an easy thing, and especially in an online class where you can't see anyone. So I really like, you know, even some of you who don't have your cameras on, I like the fact that you talk. And I really enjoy it. So let's see here.
I'll have my camera on this afternoon. It's too early.
You don't have to have it on. I just like the fact that you talk. You know, Lauren talks, Martin talked, Kevin talked, Tarek talks. He hasn't talked today. Zena talks. You guys, you talk, and I like that.
I promise, I'm here.
I know
I'm
you
struggling
are.
as you are.
I understand. But I like that you talk. So let me, as I keep babbling, I'm gonna go into this. So this is the process of hemostasis. So this is a short video.
Wow, look at this. 94% of people believe in it. Hi everybody, Dr. Mike here. In this video, we're going to take a look at blood clotting, also known as hemostasis. Now, hemostasis has 3 steps. We're going to look at step 1, 2, and 3, and it occurs when you have damage to a blood vessel wall. So you know that there's blood moving through this blood vessel, and the walls of our blood vessels are filled with smooth muscle. So in the first step, when you have damage to the blood vessel wall, what happens is it stimulates the smooth muscle in this wall to constrict. This is also termed a vascular spasm, and this is the very first step in hemostasis. Now, why do we have a vascular spasm? Why do we want the smooth muscle in the blood vessel wall to constrict? It's because it's going to limit the amount of blood going through, therefore limiting the amount of blood that may be left from that damage in the wall. So that's the first step. Now, in the second step, what you're going to find is because we've damaged the blood vessel wall, there's not just smooth muscle. There's also connective tissue, right? And connective tissue can include collagen. So when you damage this blood vessel wall, you have collagen fibers now being exposed. And these collagen fibers are like little flags to another cell component that's moving through the blood vessel, not just the red blood cells, but the platelets. And platelets are fragments of cells called megakaryocytes that are produced in the bone marrow. And platelets will recognize, what they're going to do is they're going to come past and they're going to recognize this collagen that's been exposed. Now, something interesting happens here. This second step is known as the platelet plug. So let's write that up. The platelet plug. This happens within 30 to 60 seconds, right, of this damage to the blood vessel wall. So the collagen that's been exposed, platelets coming past, they see it, they stick to it. Now, here's what happens. When the platelets stick to the collagen, the platelets release something. So what do the platelets release, right? The platelets release something called prothrombin activator. Now, prothrombin activator released from the platelets when they bind to this collagen. Prothrombin activator activates prothrombin. And what prothrombin is it's something that's produced in the liver and also requires vitamin K. So it's vitamin K dependent for its production. And prothrombin is part of this.
I think you guys asked me a week ago about blood thinners. You remember that? And I couldn't really give you an answer. I know that I think it's warfarin, which is the one that is in that they often, I want to say they, or shoot, maybe I should have looked this up a little bit better. One way that blood thinners work is by sequestering vitamin K. And so what he's referring to here, where this prothrombin is being activated that requires vitamin K, if you remove the vitamin K, guess what? You don't have prothrombin.
You said if you remove it?
Say it again.
You said if you remove the vitamin K?
If you remove the vitamin K, which is required for prothrombin here, you're not going to get the platelet plug.
Gotcha.
Coagulation phase, which is the next phase. Prothrombin turns into thrombin when prothrombin activator comes across it.
So if you need vitamin K to convert prothrombin into thrombin. So if we sequester vitamin K, and I think it's actually warfarin that's the blood thinner that's involved in isolating vitamin K. I'll look it up.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, good. Thank you. I thought it was. So
Coumadin.
Coumadin. Okay.
Yeah, warfarin is Coumadin. I take that, so I have issues with vitamin K. They're like I have to watch how much vitamin K I take because it'll affect my INR results. So it actually drops my INR results. The vitamin K, if I eat like too much kale or like spinach or even sushi, because of seaweed, my INR, it does drop.
Oh, that would kill me. I love sushi.
I know, me too. I'm a huge sushi person. So like I have to watch like how much sushi I eat because I love sushi.
That's seriously awful. Okay.
when my kids were born, I don't know if I had them in Virginia, but they were both like immediately after they were born given vitamin K shots. And they said it's standard. They do that for every baby born. Is that weird?
Probably not. I mean, I guess
It's normal.
Let me think about it a little bit. But if you think about the cutting of the umbilical cord, how much blood is lost there?
True.
I can't imagine. I mean, that's a major organ, guys. I know, but can you even you're still going to sustain some trauma. Yeah. Why would you give babies an injection of vitamin K? That's what she's asking. Well, so why do we need that all of a sudden, but we don't need it later, Mom? It's not coming to her.
I was an ICU nurse, not a neonatal nurse.
She says it has to do with blood clotting. And I said, but why do they give it to them right after they're born? But then we don't worry about it so much. And she says it's not coming to her. We'll work on this one.
Anyway, and I had my kids in Virginia and they told me it was like a state, I don't know, regulation or law. I don't know.
You might as well not argue with them about it.
Yeah, I tried not to. I had all natural childbirth, like no epidurals and stuff. So they told me like everything that they were gonna do because I was so like non-interventional about my births. Does that make
Wow.
sense?
Claire,
Yeah.
I've never had a baby, but I don't want to be in your boat.
It was fine. I'm good.
You're just tough. Okay. What were you gonna say, Becky?
I Googled it.
Go. What does it say?
It says that it is recommended that all newborns get the dose of vitamin K at birth because they're not born with enough of it at first, which is needed to blood clot normally. Babies who don't get it are at risk for vitamin K deficiency and bleeding.
Oh wow. Okay. That helps. That fixes it.
Wait, what?
Say it one more time, Becky.
They're saying it's because babies are
job, Sonia.
not born with enough vitamin K at birth. So they need it to clot
Yeah, don't
normally,
take
and babies who
Just take some.
who don't get the vitamin K are at risk for potentially fatal bleeding disorder called vitamin K deficiency. And half of the cases that do get that involve bleeding in the brain and brain damage.
Ooh, ouch. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
So I guess that's why they only need it once. It's probably just to give them a boost until they can start producing the vitamin K on their own.
Okay.
Crazy.
Yeah, and birth is kind of traumatic if you think about it. I mean,
Yeah.
for the mother and the baby. I mean,
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there we go.
Okay.
Gotta love Google.
Yes.
Molecular scissors that cut proteins. And the protein that thrombin cuts in this case is going to be fibrinogen. And it cuts fibrinogen into fibrin.
Remember that thrombin is the enzyme that's going to cleave fibrinogen. Anytime you see ogen on the end of a protein, it's a precursor protein. It's an inactive precursor protein that's everywhere until it's cut and it's activated. It circulates throughout until it's activated. Just like prothrombin is one that's activated. All of our clotting factors are free circulating until they're inactive until they need to be activated.
And this is what we want. We want fibrin because what
was someone going to ask something?
Yeah. What does precursor mean again? I'm sorry.
Precursor meaning it's the preliminary protein or it's an inactive protein. It's a protein that is not the active mature functional protein yet. Does that help?
Okay. Yes, thank you.
It's the beginning protein.
Got you. Okay, thank you.
fibrin is they are these protein threads. Right, so let's just go through this quickly. Platelets stick to the exposed collagen from the damaged blood vessel wall. All right, platelets then get activated and they release something called prothrombin activator. Prothrombin activator turns prothrombin, which is floating through, right, and produced in the liver and is vitamin K dependent, into something called thrombin. Now, thrombin will turn fibrinogen, which is always floating through, into something called fibrin. So now we also have.
So like you just said, it's always floating around. These precursor proteins are always around. They're just inactive until they're cleaved.
Fibrin at the site of the platelet plug. And what this fibrin does is, in addition to the platelets that are now accumulating at this damaged site, we now have all these fibrin fibers. And what they do is they reinforce the clot. And this is the third phase known as the coagulation phase. And now what we have is a blood vessel wall that is now no longer bleeding or losing blood. And then we have the remodeling process occurring where we start to fix this damaged blood vessel wall by putting in that connective tissue, which is help mediated by fibrin. So these are the three phases of hemostasis, also known as blood clot.
Mom, you might want to close your door. Your bedroom door.
Hi everybody, Dr.
Oh,
Mike
stop,
here. In this
stop.
video, we're going to take a look at
We like you,
blood
Dr.
and
Mike,
the
but I need
components
you
of
to
blood
stop.
and something called hematocrit.
Stop. Stop. You guys, if you don't mind, I'm going to keep going through. I know normally we would take a break, but I'm going to keep going through because I want to see how far we can get through the blood chapter before we do our lab on the lymphatics. I honestly want to see if we can finish the blood before we get into lymphatics and lab. So there's two major pathways for this coagulation, this final step. There's two mechanisms. There's the extrinsic pathway or mechanism, and there's the intrinsic pathway. And you can, this is that one that's one of the most complicated processes that involves over 30 chemical reactions. We're not going to learn all the reactions. I can maybe give you an idea of how they go, but I can say that I don't have them all memorized. But know that there's two basic mechanisms. There's an external mechanism, and there's an intrinsic mechanism. But the extrinsic meaning it's external to the blood. So if it's external to the blood, it's got to be within the blood vessels. The intrinsic method is coming from clotting factors found only in the blood itself. So the extrinsic, so looking at this diagram up here, the extrinsic pathway, damaged perivascular tissue, perivascular, peri meaning around, vascular meaning vessels or veins. So this is the damaged tissue around the veins and the damaged vessel itself. They're putting out these, releasing these procoagulants. Procoagulants meaning they're going to promote coagulation. They, looking at this diagram, they convert thromboplastin. They secrete thromboplastin, which combines with factor 7. Okay. So thromboplastin is released. It combines with factor 7. These factors are all different clotting factors that are free circulating until something activates them. So thromboplastin or factor 2 binds with factor 7. And with calcium is going to eventually activate factor 10. The intrinsic pathway starts with the platelets, our pals, the platelets that activate factor 12. or secrete factor 12. Factor 12 activates factor 11. Factor 11 activates factor 9. This, you see the cascade here? One is activating the next. Factor 9 with calcium is being activates factor 8. And both of these pathways then activate factor 10. Almost always coagulation or clotting is a combination of the two mechanisms. It's not specifically one or the other. Factor 10 then activates that prothrombin. You remember Dr. Mike in that video just now talking about prothrombin. Prothrombin is converted into thrombin. Thrombin converts fibrinogen into fibrin. And fibrin becomes that sticky substance that platelets and red blood cells stick to. So in most cases, both of these mechanisms come together to achieve homeostasis. The commonality to both of these pathways is they're both going to activate factor 10. And factor 10 is going to activate that prothrombin activator, which is going to activate prothrombin into thrombin, which is then going to activate fibrinogen into fibrin. I would remember this. I wouldn't worry so much about all these other factors. I would remember this. Remember what activates thrombinogen into thrombin. This is, if you think about it, this is a big deal because if something starts abnormally clotting, what happens? We start getting a lot of hypoxic tissues. That's partly why this pathway is so involved, is because if one thing gets activated, that doesn't mean the whole thing is going to be initiated. They all have to be activated. And it's a positive feedback loop. One factor is going to activate more of the next. One factor is going to activate a greater number of the next one. That one is going to then activate a greater number of the next one. So these clotting factors reinforce the platelet plug and convert the blood in the vicinity of that vessel injury into this non-flowing gel, where many clotting factors are formed in the liver, and they're always present in their inactive form. When one factor is then activated, it activates the next factor in the sequence, resulting in this reaction cascade, where each step depends on the preceding step. Factor 12 activates factor 11. Factor 11 activates factor 9. Factor 9 activates factor 8, factor 10. And we start just getting more and more of the molecules being activated. And the ultimate goal is that we get a large amount of fibrin being formed to make a fibrin plug. The intrinsic pathway, remember that's within the blood itself, is set off when the Hagman factor, or factor 12, is activated by coming into contact with the exposed collagen. So this is where within the platelets, the extrinsic pathway is when the tissue thromboplastin, or factor 3, is released from traumatized tissue and directly activates factor 10. So factor 3 in the extrinsic pathway, factor 10, factor 12 in the intrinsic pathway. The specific factors that I point out, like factor 3, factor 12, factor 10, and this right down here, I want you to remember that. I don't care how much more you remember, but I want you to remember that. This is a summary of all those different factors. This is that factor 10, which is essentially the start of the common pathway, which both the extrinsic and the intrinsic pathway are ultimately going to be involved in. Why does liver failure often cause clotting disorders or lack of clotting?
Because your liver and your spleen both collect the platelets, the dead red blood cells.
Well, maybe not so much your spleen. Well, you're right. It's a spleen, but why would the liver itself, why would failure of the liver cause you to not be able to clot your blood? Claire, look at this chart right here.
Yeah, it activates certain extrinsic and intrinsic pathways.
Let me say it a little differently. Where are a lot of these originating? Where are a lot of these clotting factors originating?
The liver.
They're originating in the liver. So if you have an issue with the liver, you lose those clotting factors.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah. Another thing, the reason that thrombocytopenia, which I think we're going to talk about here, thrombocytopenia, which is a lot deficiency of platelets, is bad, is because of the clotting disorders.
That makes so much sense because a lot of people that are like dialysis people have to get like their blood checked for like PTNR and their PTNR done.
Okay. What does that mean?
So the clotting, like their clotting, that's how they adjust their coumadin. So they have to get their blood drawn to see where they fall, so they can like adjust their blood thinner medication, so that because their blood I guess doesn't clot.
So that they're measuring how well their blood is clotting, and they need to get that tested regularly. Okay.
Right.
The reason they're named the way they are, factor 1 through factor 3 through factor 5 through so forth and through factor 13, is the way that the order in which they were identified. But eventually what's going to happen is thrombokinase is going to activate is going to be involved in forming prothrombin activator, which is going to activate prothrombin into thrombin, which is going to activate fibrin into fibrinogen into fibrin. That's why I want you to understand this final pathway. So how do we eliminate these clots? Ultimately, we got to get rid of the clots. We get a lot of the clots. Actually, what time did our class start? And what it goes until 10:40?
Mm-hmm.
Started at 8.
Yeah, started at 8.
Okay, let's keep going. I was gonna say is I was trying, because I told you I was up really late. I couldn't tell time for a minute. Let's keep going here. So the role of factor 12, that's this Hagman factor. Remember, that's intrinsic to the blood. It's the factor that starts the intrinsic pathway of coagulation. It's a big deal in that it stimulates clot formation in the intrinsic pathway, but it also is going to start what's going to break it down. Because, you know, we don't want clotting for forever. So the Hagman factor is activated, and it activates plasmin. Plasmin is going to dissolve the clot. It's going to dissolve the fibrin. So it's going to do what's called fibrinolysis. What does it mean when something ends with the word lysis?
It's like thinning or dissolves.
Or dissolving or breaking down.
Right. At least, yeah, breaking down.
So the plasmin is what's going to break down the clot. So it initiates, so the Hagman factor initiates the clot formation. It also starts a series of reactions that are going to initiate plasmin activation, which is going to break down the clot. So the Hagman factor activates this enzyme called kallikrein. Kallikrein is going to ultimately activate plasmin from plasminogen. Remember, anytime it's got that ogen on it, it's an inactive protein that's circulating. So Hagman factor activates pre-kallikrein into kallikrein. Kallikrein is going to activate plasminogen into plasmin, which is going to break down the clot. In a positive feedback loop. We have a lot of positive feedback loops in this clotting factors. See that? We talked a lot about negative factors, negative feedback loops. We don't talk about a lot of positive ones. Right now, we're talking about a lot of positive ones. So platelets. Platelets are thrombocytes. They're cell fragments that shed from megakaryocytes. Megakaryocytes, karyo meaning a nucleus, mega meaning big. So what these are is they are multinucleated cells. They're cells that undergo lots of rounds of mitosis, but not cytokinesis. So it says they lack a nuclei. The fragments lack a nuclei. The platelets lack a nuclei. Megakaryocytes have a really big multinucleated structure. The platelets themselves, that are also called thrombocytes, lack a nuclei. They're just cell fragments. They're just pieces. Here's your big old megakaryocyte that's huge. If you compare it, here's your typical red blood cell. Here's your white blood cell. It's a big old honking cell. And it puts off little pieces into the bone marrow, just fragments off, little pieces just keep falling off of it. That's what the platelets are. They're just little pieces of the megakaryocyte. And they remain functional for an average of about 10 days, and then they're removed from circulation by macrophages. They, unlike white blood cells, don't leave the blood in the vessels. So about 1/3 are stored in spaces in the spleen and released when needed through splenic contraction initiated by the sympathetic nervous system. Thrombopoietin, just like erythropoietin that's involved in erythrocytes, thrombopoietin is the hormone that's produced by the liver that increases the number of megakaryocytes. So here, looking here at this chart, this wonderful chart again that Claire really liked, this wonderful chart again. Here's the megakaryocytes that are coming from the same myeloid stem cell line as the erythrocytes. You've heard of pulmonary thrombosis. Have you ever heard of pulmonary thrombosis? What is it, Becky?
I've heard of it, but like everybody else,
It's a blood clot.
It's a blood clot. It's a blood clot. You're right. So thrombocytes, the reason we call platelets are also called thrombocytes is because they're the cells involved in clots. Pulmonary thrombosis is blood clots in the lungs. One of the major problems with COVID has been people developing blood clots in the lungs. You guys get your boosters. All that stupid stuff about the vaccination causing, and you know what? And let me tell you something really quick. And I'm not going to get all political on you, and I'm not going to push you to get the booster or whatever. But you guys, this is an mRNA vaccine. An mRNA vaccine. If it's an mRNA vaccine, is it possible that it can mutate the DNA? Go back in your physiology book and look and see if the mRNA is actually capable of entering the nucleus and mutating the DNA.
I want to say yes to that.
Go back and look, Jade. Go back and look, and then tell me again. Go back and look, and then tell me again. Because what does it have to do for mRNA to become made into protein? It has to leave the nucleus. And I didn't understand that until I showed you I think I showed you the book that I read recently, the Philip Detmer book, Immunity. When I always thought it was just an RNA vaccine. I thought RNA is not that stable. That's why it's not going to mutate the DNA. It's not going to stick around long enough to do anything. mRNA doesn't ever enter, once it's out of the nucleus, it doesn't re-enter it. It can't. And I'm not a very patient person when I hear people telling me that it can mutate the DNA, because especially when I start understanding how that mRNA works, I'm not very patient about it.
Do you ever ask people where they get their medical degrees? 'Cause I'm like,
I know, and it's a little scary. You know, I don't want to get very political here. You know, I was telling my mom, you know, I read a lot on Facebook. I get a lot of my news from Facebook. And sometimes that's not a good thing. But if we're not going to believe the science, what are we going to believe? Are you
certainly
going to?
not inaccurate, like like
Put it on.
what? Hello?
What'd you say?
Sorry, that was my bad.
Oh, that's it. I'm not going to believe unresearched data or material or anything on the internet unless it's like from a medical journal. I don't listen to anything.
I struggle with that when people are saying, well, you can't believe the science. I'm like, so what are you going to believe then? You know, are you going to believe somebody who, I mean, if you don't plan on believing the science, what do you plan on believing?
People want to sometimes have confirmation biases, like in psychology, where they just want to believe what they want to believe.
And if you want, and you know, if we want to attack the Fauci guy, and I stay kind of out of it, you know, I don't really get into it because I don't really have the time.
I call it mental space. I don't have the mental space for that.
I think that's I don't have the mental patience for it. I think that's kind of what I say. But if you remember what our friend Casey was talking about with the HIV virus, do you know who finally figured out how the disease was transmitted?
How?
It was Dr. Fauci.
Oh, interesting. So
if you want to vilify somebody, he's not the one to be vilifying.
My cousin works with him.
Oh, really? All right, Casey, we're going to talk about this another time because I'm going off on another tangent and we can't do this.
Okay.
Oh, Casey, I want to hear this story.
I do too. All right. Booyah, I want to hear this story because wasn't, and you ask your cousin, wasn't Dr. Fauci the one who finally figured out how it was being transmitted?
Yeah,
The
she was.
virus.
Yeah, she when it first came about, when he figured it out, she was one of the ones on his research team. So when my dad contracted HIV, she gave me so much information. Yeah, it's a lot.
I get so frustrated with people who want to vilify him right now and say, oh, well, we won't believe the science. I'm like, so what are you going to believe?
People need to respect the dude. People are always going to try and take people down. People are just horrible. And because he's in the political ring, it doesn't, but
well, he kind of got dragged into it. Do you notice that? He didn't really didn't want to be
sign up for that. He didn't sign up for that. He didn't go, I went to medical school to be, you know, a political punching bag. Like, yeah, no, he didn't sign up for that.
Well, and he's been elected as the medical general surgeon, people. He doesn't volunteer for it. It's not a volunteering position.
Yeah.
But all right, I'm going to stop going off on that. I apologize. I told you it was a late.
Oh, we could all spend like 8 hours probably just talking about it.
All right. So cessation of bleeding is specifically called what?
C.
Hemostasis. Jane, good job getting us back on track here. No, abnormal blood clotting, the thrombus, is an abnormal intravascular clot attached to a vessel wall. An emboli, or I know I'm saying that wrong, an emboli is freely floating clots. Mom, I know you're off the phone. Stay off the phone for just a minute here because I'm going to ask you to explain something to my students in really simple terms. Factors that can cause a thromboembolism. In one moment, roughened vessel surfaces associated with atherosclerosis, imbalances in the clotting anti-clotting systems, slow moving blood. Occasionally, these factors can also be triggered by a release of thromboplastin. Remember, that's one of the activating factors into the blood from large amounts of traumatized tissue. Hemophilia is the opposite. So it's caused by a deficiency of one of the factors in the cascade. And I knew what it was. I think it's factor 8. Factor 7? I think it's factor 8.
You know,
I'll look it up later. Would you explain to these students disseminated intravascular coagulation? This is my favorite clotting disorder. I told you I'm a scientist, so we don't have to think about how it relates to people's emotional standpoint. So we just like the fact that we love the science. Explain to them what this is.
they're going to wonder why I can't get dressed, but I can't.
It's early, you guys. It's still early. You notice how many have their cameras off. They're doing this for us. All right, go, Mom.
Okay, disseminated intravascular coagulation is a horrible condition people get from it's multifactorial, but it's generally severe trauma, and the blood starts clotting in the micro circulation, so the intravascular coagulation.
Your capillaries.
Yeah, so the capillaries start clotting. They use and you're trying to bleed out. Your body starts using up all of your platelets, and all of a sudden you have none left.
Let me stop her just for a minute. I told her to put it in very simple terms, which she did. So you start randomly clotting everywhere. Because your blood is constantly circulating, your chances of getting little minor tears are you're going to get them. So if your blood is now usurping all of the clotting factors,
but not from minor stuff.
Well, how are they?
When you're saying why, you said you're always getting minor tears. No, you have to have extensive issues to trigger this.
But go ahead.
This is not triggered by minor tears and minor
but
damage.
it's minor. It's major inflammation. Is it usually something that has to do with sepsis?
Like I say, it's multifactorial, and there's many different things. I've seen it triggered by different things.
Trauma included.
Trauma,
Okay.
yes, trauma can do it. My friend that had it, that we were sure she was going to die, was super scary.
Did you
but
say
anyway,
they almost always
Is
die?
that different than like
It's high death rate.
petechiae? Is that different than like petechiae? That looks like it's like a.
This is if you look at this arm, you see
this is a really mild picture of it.
It almost looks like bruising, but this is the blood coming out of the vessels into the tissues that like a bruise. Yeah, but it's caused by a different mechanism of action than a bruise. Bruise would be caused by
scary
being whacked, but this is a total different thing because it's caused internally. It creates itself.
There's no whacking involved.
No whacking involved. My friend that had this she was a first-time mom in her early 40s. Had this baby, and after the birth, she went into this stuff. I walked into the ICU. I was not working that day. Looked in her room because they said, "Oh, do you know who's in there?" She was our nursing administrator.
Wow.
She was in a head down position, trying to keep blood going to her brain, keep her pressure up, and she was bleeding out like mad. And just looking at her scared me to death. And I was an experienced ICU nurse. And the only thing that went through my head was, I'm grateful I'm not there. And they life flighted her to Salt Lake City from the mountains of Utah.
Logan, Utah.
And
It's about an hour
and
a
she
half away.
survived, but she was one of the few I've ever seen that,
So
like
when,
I say, very high mortality
when
rate.
you've used up all the clotting factors, what's left there to plot with? Nothing, and that's why you get the bleeding.
That hurts.
Yep, that was really good. It's ultimately, that's my favorite bleeding disorder, probably. Because it's so.
Have a bleeding disorder. That's my favorite.
That's because you never had to deal with it in the clinical setting.
I just get to study it and think about how amazing that is. That can happen. All right, coming back. Now, this is why I wanted to get to this before we start going into lab tonight, is I wanted to get into the blood groups. So human blood groups, A, B, red blood cells have glycolipid antigens on their external surface. What are glycolipids, guys?
Some sugar, fat. So glyco
you're
is
right.
sugar, lipid is fat.
Yep, they're sugar lipids. So they're essentially they're a tag on the red blood cell membranes. This is the basis of blood typing. Antigens is a marker that is able to stimulate an immune response. It's a carbohydrate tag that can stimulate an immune response. These antigens are unique to every individual, and they're recognized as being foreign if they're transfused into another person. Who here knows their blood type? What's your blood type, Becky?
O positive.
I think we talked about, did we talk about this before? Because we did blood last week. Yeah, we
I think
did.
a little bit, yeah.
A little bit, not very much. So O positive, who else knows their blood type? I know I saw another screen lighting up.
I'm O negative.
You're O negative. So is it Tiara?
Yes.
Okay, Tiara, what that means is that she doesn't have any antigen on her red blood cells that would go into someone's body and trigger a immune response, because nothing on her red blood cells is going to be found to be foreign. She doesn't have the A antigen. Remember, there's an A, B, and RH antigen. I can't remember exactly what we talked about a week ago and how much we got into. But there's an A, B, and RH. If you are not born with those antigens on your red blood cells, if you are exposed to one of those antigens, it's deemed as foreign, and your body creates an immune response against it. So it's recognized as being foreign, and they're promoters of agglutination because antibodies stick to them and promote agglutination, which is essentially clumping. These promoters, if you remember, I said that gens on the end of any word is a precursor of something, an inactive precursor. These antigens are considered agglutinogens, because they can promote clumping. So we have these type O carbohydrate tags. The O has this tag, lactose, fructose, and acetylglucosamine. B has an additional galactose on it. A has, rather than having galactose on it, has N-acetylgalactosamine. AB has both the A, B tags and the A tags on it. If you're O, you don't have either of these extra little tags on. So the body doesn't recognize, if it's not there, it can't be deemed as being foreign. So if you're given type O blood, because there's no foreign antigen on there, your body isn't going to create an immune response to it. Has a lot to do with self versus non-self. If it's coming from outside of you and your body doesn't recognize it as being part of you, it's foreign. And therefore it's a potential threat. So your body creates antibodies against these antigens. An individual with ABO blood may have various types of antigens and spontaneously preform some antibodies. These agglutinogens, remember, these are just antigens that can possibly cause clumping because of they can create an immune response by, when I say creating an immune response, cause antibodies to be produced against them. Cannot be mixed without serious hemolytic reactions. Hemolytic meaning blood destruction reactions. So the body will reject cells that are bearing the antigens that don't match its own by producing antibodies that bind to those foreign antigens. So if you have type A blood, you have the A antigen on your erythrocytes. Remember, this antigen is a tag. It's a glycolipid tag. And because you only have the A antigen on your red blood cells, if you're type A, you can potentially have anti-B antibodies. Because the B tag would be foreign to you if you're type A blood. If you're type B, you have the B antigen on your erythrocytes. And therefore, if you get exposed to the A type A blood, you are going to develop anti-A antibodies because your body deems them as being foreign. They're not you. This self versus non-self is a big deal. AB has both the A and the B antigens and therefore will not create neither A or B antibodies because both the A and B are deemed as being part of that person or their self. So you only create antibodies against something that's considered foreign. If it's something your body has always had inherently, your body will not, unless there's bad things happening, will not create antibodies against it. O blood, people with O blood, like Tierra, have no antigens on their blood that are deemed, they have no antigens on their blood. Therefore, if they get exposed to A antigens or B antigens through a transfusion, they're going to create both anti-A and anti-B antibodies. And when we bind antibodies to the antigens, these antibodies can, one antibody can bind to more than one antigen because they have, this specific antibody has 5 different places where it can bind antigens, resulting in the clumping of these cells or the agglutination of these cells. Questions about this?
So basically, like, if you have O blood, you're like the universal donor. Like you can donate, and most everybody.
Why are they the universal donor? Explain
They
that.
have no, they have no antibodies.
No, well, say it another way.
No antigens. I'm sorry.
Yep, they have no antigens that someone else's body is going to deem as being foreign.
Right, so it won't be as rejected.
And so the universal recipient is who?
B, AB, yeah, AB.
And I know that was Kevin in the background, I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
AB positive. Well, one thing that we're not considering right here is the RH factor. But you're right, AB positive. Oh, so if you're O positive, are you a universal donor still? Pulling the positive, negative stuff. If you're O positive, are you still considered a universal donor? And
I don't think so. Isn't that when you require the real gum or whatever if you had the baby?
The what?
That shot that you gave, isn't that when, if you're positive?
That's yep, that we're going to talk about the RhoGAM shot. But yes, and the this positive versus negative is one more antigen that you can have. It's the RH antigen, or the D, they also call it the D as in Delta, D antigen. If you're positive, you have that antigen. If you're negative, you don't have that antigen, in addition to whether you having the AB or not having them. So there's 3 antigens that you can possibly have. You can have an A, you can have a B, or you can have the RH factor. If you're positive or negative, if you're positive, you have the RH antigen or factor. If you're negative, you don't have it. Genotypes, how is it inherited? Get one allele from your mom, one allele from your dad. Both of them are equally expressed. Both genes are equally expressed. You can either get an O gene from your dad and an O gene from your mom, which means you're going to be O. You can get an A gene from your mom and an A gene from your dad, which means you're going to be A. Or you can get an A gene from your mom and an O gene from the other parent and still be A. You can be type B because you've got 2 B genes from both your mom or your dad, or you've got a B gene from one and an O from another one. The I here is an O. I sometimes call it the dud because it's the O. There's nothing there. Or you can be AB, meaning you got an A from one parent and a B from another. This is oftentimes, it's an easy way to determine whether a child was produced by a particular father. Because an AB blood type cannot produce an O child. They have to give them one of these. We don't really need to talk about this, but this is the racial breakdown of typical blood types. I think it's changing. I don't think it's always like this. This is typical blood types. How do you determine blood typing? Well, you treat them with different types of antibodies and seeing if they clump. If they don't clump with any of the antibodies, they're O negative. What type of blood is this? This is the D down here. What type of blood is this?
It's A positive.
You're right, Martin, it's A positive. And why is it, Martin, why is it A positive?
Because of like, I forget, what are those? It's like the platelets are like visible.
The clumps are visible. The
Yeah.
antibodies are visible. So it's A positive because the blood that was put on here had A antigens because it's clumping with the anti-A antibodies that were here. It's also got the D factor or the RH factor because it's clumping with the RH antibodies or the D antibodies. It's only going to clump if that antigen is present. So a transfusion reaction with our foreign blood type is going to result in clumping within the vessel. Let's talk briefly here about RH blood groups. There's 8 different RH agglutinogens. Remember, agglutinogens is just antigens that are capable of causing clumping because agglutination is clumping. So there's approximately 8 different RH agglutinogens, agglutinogens, 3 of which are the most common. The presence of this agglutinogen on the red blood cell indicates that the person is Rh positive. These antibodies are not spontaneously forming in an Rh negative individual. They're not just going to spontaneously form if you have a negative blood type. However, if that Rh negative person receives Rh positive blood, yes, you can get those antibodies. Your body will form them because that Rh positive, that's deemed as being foreign if you're not born with it. And a second exposure to the Rh positive blood will result in a transfusion clumping reaction. So Rh is not as bad as the AB incompatibilities. because it's not going to happen with the first transfusion, but it will happen with the second. Hemolytic disease of the newborn. This is what Zena was getting at earlier. Hemolytic disease of the newborn. Rh antibodies of a sensitized Rh negative mother cross from the placenta and attack and destroy the red blood cells of an Rh positive baby. An Rh negative mother becomes sensitized when Rh positive blood from a previous pregnancy or an Rh transfusion causes her body to generate Rh positive antibodies. So during labor and delivery, doesn't happen until after the first baby is born, because during that labor and delivery of that first baby, if the mother's Rh negative and the baby's Rh positive, there's a blood exchange at that point during that delivery. And the mother's Rh negative body is exposed to the Rh positive blood of the baby. And the result is that she produces Rh antibodies. Well, she gets pregnant again, and she has a baby that is again Rh positive. Well, now the antibodies that she's created from the first pregnancy are able to cross the placenta and attack the baby's blood. That's hemolytic disease of a newborn in a nutshell. The drug RhoGAM ties up the immunoglobulins of the mother, preventing her body from developing antibodies and destroying the newborn's fetus's blood. It just ties them up so it doesn't cross over. Treatment of hemolytic disease of the newborn, it can cause a lot of issues, and I won't go into my story of my friend who got a bad RhoGAM shot, because we're just going to run out of time. But treatment of hemolytic disease of a newborn involves pre-birth transfusions and then some exchange transfusions after birth. And like Zena says, this is why they give all women RhoGAM shots, because not all women are honest about whether it's their first or second child, or whether they've ever, another reason to do it is because you never know when you've been exposed, or if you ever possibly got exposed. ABO blood group is determined by what in the plasma membrane of red blood cells?
D.
Say it again.
Is it D?
D is in Delta?
Yes.
And no. What's found on the plasma membrane of the red blood cells? You're close, but not.
I thought it was lipids.
And what I think when you were saying D, were you referring to the antigen? Because you're right.
Yeah.
But remember that the antigen is it's not the antibody yet. And the blood type is not the antibody. It's the glycolipid, which is the antigen in this case. Does that make sense? Maybe. No.
Not exactly.
Okay. So antigens in this case are the glycolipids.
So could you say the glycolipids will then form the antigens? I mean, does it go glycolipids first and then the antigens? So,
Well, think of them as just being the antigens. They're recognized as being foreign. Can we do that? Can we say it like that?
yeah,
We'll talk about it in a little bit. We'll talk about it when we talk in lab about the fact that not all antigens are going to create an immune response. And not all glycolipids are antigens. But the blood type in this case is the glycolipids. It's not antibody bound to the glycolipid. The only reason that D is not correct is because it's not the antigen antibody on the membranes that's determining the blood type. It's just the glycolipids, which are the antigens. Maybe.
So in this case, glycolipids aren't different from antigens.
Say it one more time, Martin.
Glycolipids aren't different from antigens in this case.
They are not different. No, they are the antigen. If you think about it, an antigen can be a lot of different things. And we haven't talked about that specifically, and that's probably why it's not making a lot of sense, or it's not completely clear. Antigens can be a lot of things. In this case, they're the glycolipids. Guys, I need to move forward, and I apologize. Let's revisit this because we are going to talk about antigens in lab. Let's revisit this one. A person with type A blood can safely donate red blood cells to someone of type what and can receive red blood cells from someone of type what?
B.
C is in Charlie.
B is in Becky.
B is in Becky. So they can safely donate red blood cells to a person with AB blood and can receive.
Oh, A. I'm sorry. I read it as AB.
No. Well, I thought you were right. Bear with me.
Oh, I am right then.
Oh, that's bad. All right, that's funny. Person with type A blood can safely donate red blood cells to someone with AB. Yes. Because the person that has type A blood is not going to give the person with AB blood an antigen that their body does not recognize as being part of them. Just because they don't have the B, the absence of it is not going to create an immune response. They can receive red blood cells from someone of type O because the absence of it means that they won't create an immune response. You know what? When does class end? 10:50 or 10:40?
10:40.
You guys, we are stopping right here. And we're coming back to right here because this is important and it will just lead into lab.
Okay.
So we'll come in right here and go through the lab PowerPoint. So I will see you in about an hour and 20 minutes.
I have a question. I did the labs. Is the grade that like we get, is that the grade we get that's like in the grade book? Because I realized like some of the stuff, like the answers that I gave were like not